So welcome everyone. This is the last panel before all the parties. This is the best, this is the appetizer, as I call it, before party begins. So we have this little bit odd scenario where we are still waiting for two speakers. So it's going to be an active, panel with new people joining. And exactly. So
interactive.
Interactive, yeah. But welcome everyone. So the title of our panel is "The Future Starts Now: Crafting Cutting-Edge Early Childhood EdTech Solutions." And I'm Isabelle. I'm the Executive Director of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, where we do a lot of work in early childhood as well as a lot of work outside of early childhood as well. Early childhood is my personal passion. I write on early childhood. I do a lot of things in early childhood. This is a long-standing passion of mine. And the reason being that, as maybe many of you in this room already know, 90% of the brain develops before age 5. And we have 1 million connections being formed every second in the brain before age 5 when we are little ones. Yet, only 1% of, or less than 1% of GDP in developed nations is being spent on early childhood education. And I would add that less than 5% of philanthropic funding in education goes to the early years. What is maybe even more surprising and more relevant to this conversation on this conference, the number in EdTech going to the early years is even smaller. It's 4%. So philanthropy is not doing a great job, but EdTech investing in the early years is even worse. So there is a huge opportunity to fill this gap between what we know, what the science tells us about the importance of early development and the funding into that age group. But I was going to ask my wonderful panelists today to introduce yourself, your organization, and also tell us what you are most excited about EdTech in early childhood. And maybe I will start with you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sara DeWitt, and I'm from PBS Kids. There's one of our panelists. PBS is the U.S. public broadcaster, and PBS Kids focuses on kids ages 2 to 8. And our group works with amazing producers to develop television shows, short-form content, lots and lots of games, and podcasts for kids in that audience, all based on educational curriculum and really designed to help engage kids with learning and exciting engagement with characters so that they can learn through those experiences. We also have over 300 member stations across the country. So another piece about PBS is that those local stations take the content and actually bring it out into the community and do workshops and experiences in libraries with school districts trying to reach kids who are hardest to reach. So a lot of on-the-ground work in addition to just kind of the media work. But the question of what am I most excited about? I've worked in digital media development for a long time. You can never get bored. There's so much going on. It's always so exciting. Right now, I've been thinking a lot about research we've been doing on the scientific inquiry process and how kids learn by asking questions and engaging in that thought process. It feels like right now a lot of different technologies are coming together to help make that easier for kids or to engage with kids. So many things that are happening right now are question-based. And so I'm excited about the potential of inquiry-based learning through some of these new technologies, including voice, also AI. There's a lot of potential there. There are a lot of challenges as well, but I think there's something really exciting there.
Hello, everyone. Ooh, that's loud. I'm Sara Mauskopf, the CEO and co-founder of Winnie. Winnie is a child care marketplace. We help parents find daycare, preschool, and now other forms of care and education too. And we help child care providers stay fully enrolled and fully staffed. So we kind of have both of those constituents. I'm excited about, I've been working on in this space for over 7 years now, but I'm really excited. I think I'm seeing a greater recognition now more than ever on the importance of early education. I think parents are really valuing it, not just as a form of childcare, but also for their kids' development. I think we're finally starting to get some recognition at the government level and from employers about how important childcare and early education is in the economy and just overall. And so I think the things I've been preaching for a long time, now I no longer have to preach. Everyone sort of recognizes that this is an area that's ripe for innovation and investment.
Love it. Hi, everyone. I'm Chian. I'm a partner with Reach Capital. We are early stage education technology focused investors. We invest seed to Series B, where seed and Series A is really our sweet spot. And it's everything from early learning, even parent education, on through kind of workforce reskilling and upskilling. I'm personally super passionate about this category for many of the same reasons Isabelle laid out. But I think in particular, just thinking about how we interact with the world today. Think about this generation of parents, they're digital natives. There's so much that is kind of at our fingertips, and I feel like early childhood is a category where we're lagging behind, where there's an opportunity to really innovate and rethink the paradigm. And when you think about it, parents and families are some of the most resource constrained, and so they absolutely would value better experiences, whether it's finding high quality early education programs, whether it's accessing really valuable content on demand. Like, there's so many places where I think there's opportunity to innovate, and that's why I'm super excited about it. I think the other piece that I'll just mention that I think is really compelling is that we're finally at a point where I think we understand some of the nuance around screen time and the nuance around technology and the intersection of early learning. I think early on it was just like this visceral aversion to putting an iPad in front of a baby. And I think now we're at a point, especially post-pandemic, where we've seen that there's a lot of variations of how you interact with technology. There's voice, and I think we're getting better and better around speech recognition, especially for young learners. And I think that opens up a new modality of interaction. I also think we've seen the beauty of kind of real life relationships being formed over digital. As an example, I have 2 young kids, both born during the pandemic, and they've built beautiful relationships with their grandparents at a time where like they weren't able to see them directly. And I think of that as really beautiful screen time. And there's actually some really interesting research around that too, and how different live interactions are versus kind of an async experience. And so I think we're just on the cusp of really unlocking some exciting opportunities in this category.
Welcome, Martyn.
Thank you, Isabelle. My name is Martyn Farrows. I'm the CEO of SoapBox Labs, and we've already established that I have a problem with maps and large buildings, and I apologize for that. So we build speech recognition systems for children, specifically for children. We built a proprietary technology from the ground up with children in mind, and children's use cases around speech technology are very different to adults' use cases. Not just in education, but broadly how kids interact with technology. And obviously, you know, kids are not a homogenous group. A 2-year-old is different to a 4-year-old, is different to an 8-year-old. So there's a lot more kind of nuance involved in how you build these systems. But in terms of, you know, what am I excited about? I think the thing that gets us as a business collectively out of bed in the morning is that challenge of building responsible and ethical technologies around AI, but for young children that respect the needs, the wants, the requirements of kids around privacy, around equity of access. It is a different product design challenge in many ways than you would have with building these systems for adults. And I think we all should recognize that, but also be excited by the challenge that lies within that. Because, I mean, I'm a parent as well, I have young kids. I feel that my kids have the right to and deserve access to technologies that have been built with them and their needs in mind. And I think that's an important point that we should take forward as we start to look at these technologies.
Hello, everyone. Chris Bennett, CEO of Wonderschool. Really excited to be here. Sorry for the delay. I was a little lost myself. Wonderschool is a exciting company I started in 2016, based on the idea that I noticed that there wasn't enough childcare in San Francisco, and then doing more research, realizing there wasn't enough childcare really all over the world. I went to a home-based childcare program as a kid, had a really good experience in the program, and came up with this idea to empower more individuals to start these home-based programs. and that's the foundation of the company. Today, we are about 100 employees. We serve a couple thousand childcare programs all across the United States, and we're really focused on partnering more with states and governments to make childcare more accessible to individuals all across the United States. Excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Chris. So you noted, Chian, that the pandemic really upended the relationship that parents have with technology. And it seems like there is almost like a growing paradox in parents when we think about tech and early childhood, where on one hand, parents are hyper-connected, yet they are more and more lonely. And then on the other hand, parents are super dependent on technology, yet they are increasingly worried about the effects of technology. So can you maybe comment on what you're seeing for modern parents? I will start with you, Chian, because you commented on this already, and just digging into this a little bit more on how parents are using tech for their young children.
Yeah, I think it's a funny paradox you bring up, because I think about how much technology has really enabled and supported parents in really powerful ways. You think about, and the stats are really tough in terms of like 50% of new mothers reported loneliness in the past year. Like that is an extreme loneliness, not just I'm lonely occasionally. And at the same time, like we finally do have the tools to connect with family, to talk to someone who's across the country or across the globe. And so I do think that there are some technologies that are helping to bridge that gap. One example I can offer up is a company called Guardians Collective. They're expert-led peer parenting circles. They pair 4 families with an early childhood educator, all over text, and really with this goal of helping parents feel better informed, less isolated, and more confident in their parenting. And they've actually seen statistically impact on the confidence of parents and the sense of being informed, and shifting away from that loneliness. So that's one example of where I think we can really leverage technology to support parents.
So what are you seeing on PBS? I mean, are parents using those digital tools for babysitting?
They definitely were during the pandemic, and it was a really interesting moment where there had been a lot of screen time anxiety for kids, and then all of a sudden screen time became a necessity for kids. One of the things that's coming out of that pandemic time, there's definitely like a pushback now of trying to do less screen time, which I think makes sense. We need more balance. One of the things that's come out of it that I'm really excited about, though, is parents reporting that they're doing more co-engagement around media. So many parents in the pandemic started watching TV with their kids or watching movies with their kids because that was something they could do together, and realized how much they enjoy it. And when parents and kids are watching together, they're more likely to be talking. And we know from years of research, there's just a lot that says that if there is any conversation about what a kid is watching or engaging with, the learning gains are going to be greater. Their critical thinking skills are going to be greater. So I think that's a real positive, and I'm hoping that we can kind of hold on to that as a society. I think just one more point is we should also be thinking about the huge technology shift that happened for parents of young children, and particularly parents of early elementary school kids. In 2019, most kids, if they engaged with technology, were engaging with a tablet. And in 2021, you think about all of the first grade classrooms across the country who were suddenly issued laptops. This was not a technology that kids had been using. And they suddenly were using it for everything. That also meant that a lot of families who didn't have a device that their kids could use at home suddenly had this new device. And I think this is something that really changed the dynamic. And it's going to be a while before we understand the effects of that, what it meant to give that type of technology to young children in 2 or 3 years, how that's affected their education. So I think that's also something interesting for parents.
So Sara, for you, technology is more, it feels like more of a back-end solution, but what are you hearing from parents and from your childcare providers? What are the needs that you're seeing, at Winnie?
Yeah, so I mean, we've definitely seen since the pandemic, like childcare providers embracing technology a lot more. They were very reluctant even to claim a free Winnie page pre-pandemic, and now everyone recognizes the need to have a web presence. But we're seeing, that even go further, whereas like enrolling in childcare used to be like a 6 to 8 week minimum process where you tour a bunch of preschools and then you make a decision, and now that can all happen online, and there's a lot more willingness on both the parent side and the provider side to just make that decision instantly in some cases, sight unseen, and that makes the whole system a lot more efficient. Obviously, you have to, really care about quality, and that's why we at Winnie take quality really seriously. But if you can just make that process and make those matches a lot faster, you make the childcare businesses more profitable, you make parents' lives easier. It's a win-win.
Chris, what are you recommending tech inside the classrooms?
We're definitely recommending it for the childcare providers. And one thing that we're seeing a lot of childcare providers need support with is a business support. So helping them track their profit and loss. There's been a lot more demand for this recently because during the pandemic, a lot of states were giving a good amount of dollars to childcare providers in grant funding. And to receive that grant funding, they had to have a better understanding of their business. And oftentimes they didn't have that information. And so we're seeing childcare providers adopt a lot more childcare management solutions that have, business support tools so that they're able to get that level of visibility so that they're able to work closer with states.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a moment. Super interesting on equity. Yeah. Martyn, what are you seeing? So screenless technology, is this being increasingly adopted in early classrooms, in parents? Tell us about what you're seeing on your end.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the most interesting kind of innovations that we're seeing are the ones that remove the screen from the equation. And obviously, with young kids, they are vocalizing early on, right? So they can interact with their voice and they can get feedback using their voice. But they can also combine that with, physical products as well. So we're starting to see these kind of like, combined sort of vocal voice tech with a book, this thing called a book that you can use, so there's a kind of like there's an immersive experience that is happening with a tactile physical book that's sitting on a desk, but there's also, an engagement level via voice and with audio kind of almost like a soundtrack to the book that is making the early kind of childhood reading experience more engaging. So I think those things are kind of really interesting, quite simple actually, and using things that most of us now will have in our homes, like an Alexa or a Google Home or whatever it might be. Using those technologies, or even a phone, and combining those like the kind of multimedia kind of approach.
So, Chris, let me come back to you on this point about equity, because in a lot of ways, tech is often associated with greater inequity. So how can we ensure that those new solutions that you are all working on right now are reaching all kids in an equitable way? And you alluded to something already with governments, but I just would love to hear more of what you're doing on reaching to more kids, more families.
Yeah, our journey has been interesting. So when we started off the company, we were primarily focused on consumer parents and consumer providers. And through that, we just inevitably served a much higher income clientele. And the cities we were focused on, San Francisco, LA, New York, sort of aligned to that. But during the pandemic, we noticed that there was a lot more interest from governments to support lower income childcare providers. And that's something we've leaned into a good amount. And through that, we found that we're able to reach a type of childcare provider we weren't really able to make our economics work before. And it's primarily due to governments having the Department of Health and Human Services having a pretty strong focus on lower income individuals in America and working to make technology more accessible to them to support these families and providers, but also to get data to better support them.
So how does it work? So governments pay for your solution?
That's right, yeah. So the way our model worked before, we would charge a percentage of tuition. And so, it was debatable whether the parent or the provider was paying for the fee, but it was sort of blended between the two. And what we're finding is that governments are willing to subsidize it fully, to bring it to states, to childcare providers in states, so that it's free for the childcare provider.
Yeah, thank you. Sara, equity feels like it has been embedded within PBS mission from the start, but can you maybe share a little bit more of your reach and what you're doing on equity to make sure that everyone benefits? Yeah.
Yes, of course. We really, at PBS, our mission is to reach all America's children and be representative of children in the United States. And we realized just years ago, as we were building out more and more digital services, that we needed to think about how we were going to reach kids who didn't have great Wi-Fi or broadband at home, who didn't have the latest devices. Most kids, even higher income kids, don't have the latest devices. They tend to have their parents' hand-me-downs. And if you think about kids who are going to community centers and libraries, you also are dealing with older technologies. So we have issued this kind of as a technology challenge to the engineers that we recruit and hire, to say, we not only want to be building games, we want to build games that degrade gracefully on older platforms. And it takes a special kind of person, but they're out there who really like this kind of challenge and who want to figure it out. And so we're often building for operating systems that are 2 or 3 generations behind what most of us have in our pockets, because that is what kids can access. Also pushing really hard for downloadable content, so that if the PBS Kids Games app has 250 games, but you can download them. You can set how much storage space you'd like. So when you have Wi-Fi, you can download the games, take them away and play, and then the next time you're at the library or at McDonald's, somewhere that has Wi-Fi, you can swap out your games. So really trying to think intentionally about making sure that as many kids as possible can access the content.
Thank you. Sara, you're doing an extraordinary job on the workforce, on equity. So tell us more.
Well, one thing I was going to say is, I think when the conversation gets around, childcare, early education, and equity, there's this tension because childcare is so expensive for families, and we talk about, how do we make it more affordable and cheaper for parents? And this may get me canceled, but childcare should be more expensive. Childcare is an incredibly valuable service for this economy and for children. It sets the foundation for the rest of their lives. It's arguably more important than higher education. Sorry to the folks in that room over there, for future outcomes. So it should be really, really expensive. And until we value it, and until we say, yes, this should be a very expensive service, this should cost our economy a lot of money, this should be a huge percentage of your income going to childcare, we're not going to get anyone to foot the bill. We're not going to get employers to pay better or to provide these benefits. We're not going to get the government to step in. We're not going to get families to say, you know what, yes, childcare is more important than my family vacation or my car. It's actually the most important thing I spend my money on. And so, I want to throw that in the mix because I think we always, when we think about equity, we think about, how do we make it cheaper? But I would argue, let's make it more expensive. Let's value the thing. Let's pay early educators well. Let's make this a really competitive field that pays well, that everyone wants to get in. And we up-level the whole industry, and then money will come. When a service is valued, people spend money and fund that industry. So I kind of feel like that's the first step.
Can I have a few applause here? Yes.
Can I jump in with a little
data?
I
was just going to comment one quick data point to support your point. A lot of you probably know this in the audience, but early childhood educators are in the bottom 2% of our in terms of...
I think like 1 in 3 are food insecure. Like they can't even feed themselves. And these are the people that are educating, you know, our most vulnerable population. So we need them to be like not starving.
100%. And just to add to that data, you look at just across OECD countries, the US spends $500 per child in the early years, where the average amongst these countries is $14,000. And then the amount that Nordics spend is like upwards of $25,000. So you think about like the college education, like that's the comparable in terms of how much the entire country is spending. And so I do think there's an onus on the government as well to step it up and to help fund this further, because at least the model we're seeing in other geographies is that that is part of it. And then just to put that also in context, you compare it to K-12, we're in like the bottom relative to OECD countries in terms of how much we spend 0 to 5. And then we're in the top when we look at K-12 and higher ed. And so it's a real, I think, disconnect in terms of how we spend capital in this country. And so I think there is an opportunity. There's very clearly other models where this does work. But I echo Sarah's point that like this is important work. It is not supposed to be a race to the bottom in terms of cost. Like we fundamentally should value this. And I do think that there are ways to grow the pie and ways to innovate, to push on this. Just to give, I think, 2 concrete examples. I think one is that right now, there's a lot of mismatch between supply and demand. And so that's where I think something like a marketplace can help bridge that gap. And I think the less there's a mismatch, the more efficient it becomes. So that's better for providers, better for families. And I even think if you go a layer deeper in terms of like looking at how many spots are open only half days or because of a sick child or something, there's a lot of hidden supply that I think is waiting to be unlocked. So that's like one big opportunity I put out there that within today's structure today, without getting more government funding in, we could help tap. And then a second is like helping early childhood educators earn more. So again, I'll go back to Guardians Collective. These early childhood educators who are in the classroom are also making money by supporting families over text. And so that's an additional $30 an hour that they're earning.
Thank you. So I was going to shift gears a little bit. It feels like a lot of the talks at this conference this year is about AI, generative AI in particular. So very curious about what your views are about AI and early childhood education. And I will start, obviously, Martyn, this is what you do, so I would love to start with you on this question on what you're seeing, obviously at SoapBox, but also more broadly about the use of AI in the early years.
Yeah, and I think like in many ways, the phrase AI has become so kind of meaningless now that it's being attached to seemingly every platform that, I mean, you know, it's, at the end of the day, AI is just technology, right? It's not rocket science, it's not witchcraft, it's not magic, it's data built upon with models that allow us to do things and automate processes that we might otherwise take a long time to do and might have to be done manually. The key for me around all of this is looking at the design process and thinking about, well, how proactive are we going to be about things like equity by design when we think about data sets that we're going to use to build these models out? And we've talked about this before, Isabelle. I know that you know I'm very passionate about this, but it is a fundamental shift in terms of how we think about building these systems, because if you don't get the data set right, and if you don't think carefully about how you want that data set to be representative so that when you train the models, you're able to effectively include all of those constituents that you want to include, then you will never achieve your goal, and it will always be a mismatch and a misapplied use of the technology. So I think, you know, there's too much kind of passive approach to data sets. Data sets are treated as if they kind of exist in a little kind of vacuum of their own and we shouldn't touch them. But actually, we have control over data sets, and those data sets are the foundation on which we build a lot of these systems, and we need to shift that focus and make equity by design as important as privacy by design. That's, for me, if I come back here in 5 years' time, and hopefully we will be talking about equity by design as much as we talk about privacy by design.
Chian, are you investing in anything interesting in AI and early childhood?
Yes, and I'd love to invest in more. I feel like there's a little bit of hesitation sometimes in talking about AI and young children, and I think there's many reasons to be cautious, but I think we forget about how much of early childhood is actually supporting families, is supporting providers, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to build tools that really supercharge providers, supercharge families. Just to give one specific application that I thought was really interesting. There's a company called Happy Pillar, and they essentially have kind of speech-to-text voice technology that helps them diarize conversations between a child and their parent or caregiver. And they're using that to actually apply tools from therapy, specifically PCIT. And so it's a way to broaden access to a tool from therapy, not meant to replace it, but really to help build and practice these skills in terms of having these positive interactions with your child and creating that space. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to really apply that technology with a purpose. And so to me, that's really exciting.
I was going to ask one last quick question to the panel, but I want you to get ready with any question from the audience. We'll have a few minutes, okay? So last question from me is, it seems like the interest in early childhood has been going up. True or not? Sara?
So in the media industry, the interest in early childhood is going down. If you've watched in the last 9 months, you've seen a lot of major companies start to retract in their kids' content development and really shut down their animation studios and kind of pull back the number of shows they're making. Now, we were in a moment where there was so much money being thrown at early childhood programming, television programming, that it was inevitable that there'd be some shift, but it's been pretty dramatic. So from my perspective, there's right now kind of a pullback.
Sara? True or not?
I think true compared to, when I started Winnie in 2016, where like childcare and early childhood was like a dirty word, and you couldn't even say it if you wanted to raise capital. But not true compared to like the peak of 2021, where everyone kind of wanted to invest in this area, and it was the new hot thing, for 6 months. But I think now is actually a great time. It's like, real people only, like people who are really truly passionate about making change. Also, like the emphasis right now on building profitable businesses, I think is working to the advantage of folks who want to work in early childhood. It's an incredibly fragmented market, and it just takes time to build a strong business in this space. A lot of the kind of incumbents started many, many years ago. And so I don't think that lends itself well to like the put in $1 billion and it grows 10x overnight kind of model that was popular in 2021. I think it lends itself well to like, let's fund real valuable businesses that have a big TAM but may take some time, like Winnie, but plenty of others. And so I think it's a good time.
Thank you. Chian, what are you seeing?
I echo the sentiments from Sara. I think that it's still, to your point, kind of in the broader context, a drop in the bucket. But to me, that signals the opportunity. I think as an investor, when I see something that is undervalued by the rest of the market, to me, this is like a great time to invest. I'm glad not everyone else is paying attention, because I think that there's a lot of value to be unlocked. And I love a time where the people who are building are deeply passionate about the problems to be solved versus coming in either technology first or just because they see a lot of dollars to chase. I think people who are building today see a real fundamental problem to be solved. And I'm excited to back companies that build real value, right? That are creating something that is truly meaningful for families, for caregivers, and I think there's no better time than now.
Martyn?
I'll restrict my comments to as an observer rather than a participant, as a parent and having experienced kind of childcare provision in Ireland. I'm going to restrict it because it's going to be quite a niche answer, this, unless there's many people from Ireland in the room. What I've observed is that there's been huge strides, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, in terms of our understanding of what's important from a curriculum delivery perspective and how education happens in those early years, right? That's really moved forwards. But the business model is still totally broken. And I think that we still haven't figured out what is a real business model for the provision of those services as a public good almost to all kids who deserve to have it. And I think that's the bit that still needs work. And you're doing a great job of trying to figure out.
So we should go to Ireland next? Or is there next market?
You should do that, yeah. I'll bring you to Ireland, actually. Yeah. You should be the spokesperson for that, actually, based on what you were talking about earlier.
For me, I'd say true. And for two types of customers we work with, employers and with governments, we're seeing a lot of interest in early childhood, more so than we've ever seen. And we sort of expect it to continue because you just continue to hear it from the federal level as well.
I like the positive note. Thank you. So turning to the, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
So two questions, one for Chian and one for Sara. I'll ask them both together. So, we talked about how little EdTech funding is actually going into early childhood. As an early childhood EdTech founder, is something I'm very aware of. And a lot of it seems to be hesitation around a direct-to-consumer model, because that's where a lot of early childhood tends to be. So, as a venture capitalist, when you're looking at this segment, do you have a different view on direct-to-consumer? Do you think that the trend is going that way, or are you also looking sort of at companies who have their feet in both sides of it? So that's a question for you. For Sara, the question really is, given that you're a marketplace and you see possibly a lot of different providers coming in, are you seeing alternative models that are popping up from traditional type providers, or is it still quite traditional kind of models that are there?
Yeah, I think providers are somewhat, and Chris can speak to this too from the provider side, but they're somewhat slow to change their ways. One of the things we're seeing is a lot of demand from parents for less full-time care. So part-time, drop-in options, more flexible care, and providers are, the ones that are adapting are doing better if they can adapt to this, because it's where the demand is. And a lot of times the smaller providers, like the home daycares, are actually better at adapting to some of the market demand changes, and whereas like bigger centers are more entrenched in their ways and their business models, and it's harder for them to meet the changing demand.
On my side, I'd say Reach more generally, we invest both B2B and B2C and actually do a split 50-50 approximately fund by fund. And so we're very much believers in both models and think they're important, particularly in a market like this where a huge part of the payer population is parents and families. What I think is encouraging is on the B2B side, sometimes it's only schools. In this case, it's both schools and employers, to Chris's point, and government even. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities there. What I think is sometimes challenging is that each of these buyers are quite distinct in what they look for. Like the consumer market is very competitive. You really have to get LTV and CAC line dialed in. And then on the B2B side, you think about employers, that's a very specific sale relative to government, relative to providers. And even within providers, there's kind of a handful of really big players, and then everything else is SMB essentially. And so like the go-to-market motion is quite unique. And so that's something I would push founders to really think about is like, what is your edge and like where will you have an unfair advantage to do that? And then kind of start there.
We have time for one last question. Yes, before cocktail. So you have the last,
This is a general question for whomever would like to answer it. Speaking about equity, how are you reaching families that are even further equity seeking? So those with kids with disabilities, neurodivergent kiddos, physical disabilities, learning environment. So I won't go into that, but how are you reaching families for those who are even further equity seeking?
We just launched a special needs childcare search on Winnie, which is like very early. You can go to winnie.com/special-needs, and really designed so that providers who can support families with children that have different needs can say so on their Winnie page and can kind of raise their hand. And a lot of times, you know, it's just a willingness to have a conversation with a parent and be open to kind of adapting your program. There was actually, because it's Autism Awareness Month, there was just an article that came out that, you know, I forget, it was like 1 in 6 children with autism is kicked out of preschool. And yeah, so it's like, it's probably worse than what I just said. And it's not that these kids can't thrive in a group care environment. In fact, like, it can be really great for all children in the program to have neurodivergent kids in the program. It's that the providers really need to adapt their program and certain behaviors that might be more apparent in a neurodivergent population, like biting, are like kind of grounds for expulsion in a lot of programs, when really you can just adapt to these children. And if you're willing to kind of understand that this might be a behavior that is actually more common in this population, and if you just change your program a little bit, it would be fine. So anyway, that's now something we're trying to roll out. A lot of times, you know, it's super hard to find childcare for everyone, and then it's even harder if you have any kind of special need that you need addressed. And so just making it a little bit easier for parents to find providers who are sort of willing to support different needs.
Sarah, do you want to add to that? Because you're doing some amazing work there. Yeah.
We've been thinking a lot about design choices you can make to make media more accessible. So working with the National Center for Accessible Media on captioning and descriptive audio, but also with organizations like Able Gamers and some other equity firms, really looking at what can we do even within the gameplay? How can we boost color contrast? How can we give kids the option of turning off music or kind of reducing some of the sensory load? Certainly we hear from a lot of parents that a lot of our shows kind of connect with neurodivergent populations, and so we're trying to understand that a little bit more and do more testing and research. But this is critical and something I think we really need to continue to be focused on, and really publishing these kinds of tools so that everyone can access them and see, you know, color contrast can make a huge difference on a screen. It's very simple to do, but it just takes a little bit of work to understand.
Thank you. Well, we are well out of time, so please join me to thank our panelists. Thank you. And everyone, enjoy the evening plans and tomorrow's sessions as well. Thank you for joining us.